Welcome to Redeeming Missions, a podcast from Every Home for Christ about the complexity of Christian missions and evangelism in our time. We host conversations that will challenge us through unique global perspectives and honest stories. Redeeming Missions is a podcast for ministry leaders, passionate evangelists, and the rest of us who might be a little bit more cautious or even disenchanted with the topic. Together, we're on a journey to find the heart of what it means to carry Christ to our world. I'm your host, Tanner Peak, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. Welcome to this episode of Redeeming Missions. I'm sitting here in Dominican Republic. I'm sitting on a beautiful beach. Actually, it just seems like such a fitting place to have a conversation about what God is doing in the Caribbean. It feels appropriate, but I'm sitting here with my friend Derryck, who comes actually from Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm excited actually just to have a conversation with you about who you are, about who God made you to be, and just really what's happening in your part of the world.
Okay, thanks so much, Tanner. Thanks for coming. Thanks for allowing me to share my story. I appreciate it. So let me just start from the beginning.
Amen.
I always share this testimony with pastors, actually, that I was preserved, as I say, for a purpose. And I really feel that this is the purpose that I'm living now. It's a little sad, though. When I was very young, I grew up with a solid Christian mom. She was a Christian. And so my brothers and I, we were always, it started forcing us to church, but then quickly that became our life. So we grew up, literally in church from a very tender age. We were involved in everything in church. We started to play music. So we were quickly, by 13, 14 years old, we were the musicians for the church.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and we were like obsessed with it, not passionate.
That's awesome. What did you play?
I played the guitar, I played the bass, I played a little drums.
Wow, I didn't know that about you. That's awesome.
I came from a musical family. My uncles and aunts, they're all pastors on my mother's side. So we have a rich, heritage coming from them. But my dad, he was a wealthy businessman. And he wasn't saved, so his life was different. And he would, come home at times, actually many times, and give a lot of trouble, as an alcoholic. But one of the things that he used to do a lot was put us out of the house.
Wow.
Pretty big house. And we grew up from a little boys, I should say, because when we would have to run, all of us would have to take off. And so we would have to spend, parts of our lives living by uncles and aunts. And, when you're a kid, it's not a problem, it's fun. But the reality is, you're out of school, you have to go to a different school. There's an old saying, a rolling stone gathers no moss. If you ever heard that term. So it was hard to settle. But I remember this one time, my dad, he was really out of it. He was really drunk that night. And he took up his loaded firearm and he shot at us. In a little corner, we were huddled. And boy, we thought that was it. We were dead that night. And
wow.
That's why I said, the Lord preserved us. Because my brothers were in ministry too for a purpose, which is this purpose. It normally brings a little tear to my eyes when I think about it. But the Lord really helped. He helped me. He helped all of us since then. Because, like with Joseph, out of every bad cometh a good. So one of the good that came out of us running and having to live in a different city was I met Alicia.
Wow.
So
which is your now wife.
My wife, yeah. There was no way our paths would have crossed because we live in two, distant cities. So that was one good thing that came out of it. The other good thing that came out of it was I started to live with my uncle, who is an accountant. He's a chartered accountant, a CPA in your terms. And my whole, vision, it shifted because I was in a different environment. He was a straight shooter. He still is a man of integrity. And I started to see how this guy operates, how his wife operates. Good, solid Christian people. And I wanted to be like him. And he helped me, and I started to study. The Lord blessed me. And quickly in my early 20s, because I went at it aggressively, I wanted to be an accountant. I liked how my uncle looked. He was in this tie, had this briefcase. I wanted to be him. I wanted a house. I wanted a family. I wanted to live a straight life like him. And the Lord helped me, and I quickly qualified, and that really was my life. I was settled as an accountant. If you ask me back then, if I would have chosen this life as being the national director for Trinidad for an evangelistic, organization, going on the streets and sharing Jesus, I would say, no way, Jose, no way. I remember even in my church growing up, my pastor would ask us to go out and evangelize. And I was in the corner sitting with my guitar, and I would bend my head down and say to myself two things: no way, and not in a million years. I wasn't going out there because I was afraid. I didn't know what to say. And that's why I feel so convicted today that there are a lot of Christians that are like me. And because of Every Home for Christ, I had a paradigm shift. I started to see things differently. When I met Alicia, I didn't know, her dad was so, involved in all these organizations. I didn't even know what the letters meant or what it stood for. And one day, my pastor shared a vision. He said, we want to pray for this nation of Trinidad and Tobago. And we wanted to go into every single municipality and gather the churches within each municipality and come on one day, bring the musicians, unite the churches, and pray for the nation. We want to do that for the year. And he asked me to handle the logistics. And so I started to call pastors. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know who Derryck Dhanoosingh is. I'm not a pastor, I'm an accountant. I didn't go to seminary school. And I started calling the pastors and getting them on board and doing rehearsals and putting the programs together. And we prayed for the nation. And then we went to another municipality and another city and another county. And I started to get accustomed pulling them together. And then one day in 2010, some guys from the US just showed up at one of the prayer meetings. And they asked who was Pastor Ramdas, Keith Ramdas. And, they thought to themselves, this guy has a heart for the nation. This is our guy. And they introduced him to Pastor Ramdas. Pastor Ramdas brought them into our church, and they sat and they spoke, they talked and so on. And then Alicia and I were asked to give them a little tour of the island, show them about. And we showed them about. We took a little drive, and while we were having a little coconut, I remember Scott, I think it was having this conversation that, hey, this is the first time that we've been to the Caribbean and to Trinidad. My wife says, no. And Scott says, what? She said, no, this is not the first time you've been to the Caribbean. He said, really? She said, yes, Every Home for Christ has been to the Caribbean. He said, how do you know that? And she said, she was a little girl when Every Home came. And her dad was the national coordinator. He said, what? She said, yes, we had US teams in Trinidad.
Wow.
She was 13 years old. And when I think about that, Tana, to see how the Lord reconnected that to me,
Yeah.
because my father-in-law was the national director. He was responsible for bringing AIDS into the Caribbean and going into other islands. And I started to learn about that when I went to. I said, Dad, what is this about? And they took me to the office. They pulled out the drawers. They had all the files.
Wow.
They had all the tracks. They had the history. And he told me what they did and how they did it, and which islands they were in. And I was just baffled. My mother-in-law showed me living proof of the power of the printed track, where they would give out tracks, and sometimes up to 10 years after, people were still mailing back in responses. They had a system, and they would connect these people to local churches. So this was crazy. This was just crazy. And so I started to work and help Every Home for Christ. I was still employed, with the accounting firms. Had no desire whatsoever to leave that because, I was quickly in my late 40s going up to my 50s. So I had an established position,
right?
Pension, everything was set. And one day, it just happened in my home actually. Scott was so, he came, he was quiet. He didn't really say anything. Sometimes I wonder if he was waiting for God to ask it or say. He didn't say anything, and it just happened in conversation. It just came out, and I said to Scott, "Yeah, I'll consider it." When I told my wife that, she said, "What?
What a story!
I mean, you'll leave your job?" I said, "I think so. I think I'll leave my job."
What your wife was saying, will you leave? She was saying it more like cautious, like, wait, you would think about leaving your job to do this?
Well, it wasn't so cautious.
Huh.
Because my wife grew up.
That's right.
In an environment with a father with no salary.
Wow.
You see, he was what you call those pioneering missionaries. He would go, Tana.
Yes. From
nation to nation with like $13, $19 in his pocket. He has testimonies like that.
Wow.
So for her, and from her perspective, it wasn't cautious because that was her life. She lived that life, and it wasn't like we're gonna suffer because you're gonna get a drop in income. It really wasn't that with her because she was built differently. I came from a wealthy family, so I didn't need to have faith. I just went in the drawer and took money. The resources were always there. I didn't need to exercise faith for anything. My dad would just buy it. Wow. She came from a background where they would pray for something, believe for it, and get it. I mean, as crazy as a car. They didn't have a car. They prayed for a car, and somebody gave them a car. So my stories fade in comparison to those stories. I'm just really overwhelmed and blessed to be a part of Every Home for Christ, because Every Home for Christ has shifted my paradigm. I've had a whole shift in thinking because of how I grew up, and then I feel so passionate now to help those Christians, just like me, who I think might have gotten it wrong for 40, 50 years. So when I go to some pastors, I'm not a pastor, but I feel more and more bold and convicted to ask them to reassess what you've been doing for the last 50 years. Is this thing working? Really? There are a lot of resources you pump into, what you do.
Programs, yeah.
Programs. And I share with them this little quote I learned along the way, which says, methods are many, principles are few. Methods always change, but the principles never do. So sometimes you change the packaging, but the content remains the same.
Wow.
And we need to be relevant to the times that we're in.
Yeah, that's right.
Coming from the Amsterdam 2023 and hearing people like Rob Hoskins speak, you realize how there's a whole market with Gen Alphas and the millennials that we need to know how to connect with them.
Yeah.
And that is why at every Home for Christ Caribbean, Tanner, I don't want to be caught around the corner, around the bend. We want to be in front. And over the couple of years, the Lord has helped us to produce digital resources. We produced actually 2 gospel animated presentations of the gospel,
Wow.
So when we send this to kids, man, they glued to it. So this speaks to them much more than, let's say, a conventional track. So they look at this and they see the little actions and the movements and so on. And even with the accent, it's not an American accent. It's a Caribbean accent. So, they feel much more at home with it. But, we use it as a means to introduce Jesus to them. As I learned from Every Home for Christ, that it's important to introduce people to Jesus first, not your church. So we're not introducing people to our church. It'll come after. But our main goal is to introduce people to Jesus. Now, you have a nice line that you use, and I added on my own tagline.
Nice. There you go.
So when we go to churches, we talk about sharing the gospel with everyone, everywhere, in every generation. And I'm saying by any means necessary.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Everyone, everywhere, every generation, and we use every means necessary.
That's awesome.
So when I say every means necessary, it could be digital, but it could be other means as well. Like
it's beautiful.
Have some nations that we have to strap tracks onto a boat, like in Suriname, and take it out. In some terrain, I was sharing with somebody, I think it was Mexico, where they strap tracks onto like a donkey, because of the terrain.
Wow.
And we also want to be relevant to the different audience and people. So I'm saying to myself a couple of years ago that, we're concentrating a lot on homes because, this is where the people are. But then I'm saying, this is not only where the people are. They're not only in homes. And if we want to get to everyone, everywhere, we need to find out where they are and be relevant to where they are. And so I've started to look at institutions. People are in institutions like schools. You have kids in orphanages. You have old people in senior citizens' homes. You have people incarcerated. So if we talk about the marginalized, everyone needs Jesus. Everyone needs a chance. So in terms of being relevant, not only to the times that we're in, but to the people that we want to minister to. Every Home for Christ Caribbean just produced, just hot off the press printing now, a track that we wrote especially for the incarcerated.
Wow.
Deliberately for those in jail. The name of the track actually is Locked Up, but Not Locked Out.
Wow.
It's great.
It's beautiful.
And what we're doing now, Tana, is we're partnering with not only churches. Historically, we've partnered with churches to get into the communities where the homes are.
That's right.
But this strategy now is partnering with institutions, organizations, to get into institutions.
Wow.
For example, in the Caribbean, let me use Trinidad as an example. We have the Prisons Fellowship of Trinidad and Tobago. So the Prisons Fellowship of Trinidad and Tobago, they have the door open to go into the prisons. So I said, listen, if I could talk to the Prisons Fellowship director and tell him what we would like to do, we could possibly get a door open into the prisons. And so said, so done. The Lord helped us.
Wow.
And we into the prisons. Into the schools, you have the Inter-School Christian Fellowship. And these people are Christian teachers. They already into the system. So, we use the resources that we have, the human resources,
right,
to get the word into the schools. My father-in-law started Hospital Christian Fellowship with Christian doctors and nurses that are in the hospitals. So through that organization, we use and we get the tracts and the word into the hospitals through the nurses and doctors.
Wow.
So apart from getting into the communities, we also into these institutions through these organizations.
The Discovery Method is an easy-to-use discipleship curriculum created by Every Home that is designed to make the Bible accessible to everyone, regardless of background, education, or culture. In the past year, 21 million people responded to the gospel message as a result of Every Home's ministry around the globe. You can equip local leaders with the Discovery Method to help new believers grow in their faith. Partner with us today at everyhome.org/discovery.
Derryck, that's amazing. I mean, you've said so many things in sharing that I think are beautiful. I think that one of the things that as you're talking, we're talking about everyone everywhere.
Yeah.
And I love everyone everywhere, every generation, by any means necessary.
Yeah.
I love that. You have my blessing to add that on anytime you want. I love that. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think maybe our average listener who might be listening to this podcast,
Yeah.
they might have a perception of what the Caribbean is.
Yeah.
In their mind, they might think of resorts, or in America, they might think of going on a cruise and stopping at these islands.
Okay.
But they might not think of it as a mission field.
Yeah.
in the way that you're talking about it. I wonder if you could describe a little bit of the Caribbean to someone who doesn't really know much about this part of the world. What are the challenges of actually getting to everyone everywhere? I mean, I think I read a statistic that there's 7,000 islands in the Caribbean, but only maybe 100 of those are inhabited.
Yeah.
But just the logistical challenges that you faced, maybe you could share a little bit on that for us to understand.
Okay, sure. I could only share on what I know.
Right.
The islands that fall under my responsibilities are from Belize coming straight down to Suriname.
Right.
In terms of the geography, of most of the islands, I should say it's not that challenging, in terms of having access to get to people, except Suriname and Guyana. So with all the other islands, we have good roads, good infrastructure, and we have wonderful people that are really open to the gospel.
That's right.
They're not closed to it at all. The majority of homes that we go to, they welcome us. They're happy to hear about the gospel.
Yeah, people are pretty receptive,
Jesus.
right?
Yeah, pretty receptive. And in terms of the challenges, the challenges are, as I said, a little different, except Suriname and Guyana, where you may have to jump on a boat to go into what we call the interior.
Right.
And as we said, even these people need to hear about the gospel as well.
That's right.
I would say what we do in the Caribbean is we really look at your safety and security. That is of paramount importance, because there are some what we call hotspots in the Caribbean, like islands like Jamaica or even Trinidad, with the crime rate on the rise. But over the years, we have a really good system in place with churches and security, and even the places that we choose to take, like the foreigners in to do work. It's very safe, and as I said, the people are very welcoming, and it's a great experience, because we've learned over the years that the only way to know is to go. It's only when you go, then you know. And that is straight from the Great
I love
Commission,
that.
which is to go. So we spend a lot of time praying as well, but we don't only want to pray. We need to go, but we're not going without praying.
That's right. So, I mean, this is a very diverse part of the world. I don't know that people understand that. Even me being here, we're here at a conference with all of our leadership from this part of the world, and just sitting and talking, having discussion with the various coordinators, you realize, man, that St. Lucia is different than Guyana versus Suriname, which is different than Dominican Republic or Trinidad and Tobago. And there's just so much diversity, different colonized. I mean, it was colonized by different countries, and that's had a certain impact. Can you speak more to the diversity of this part of the world?
One of the things that comes to mind, as you say, challenges, is the language barrier.
That's
in,
right.
In some of the nations, but it's a challenge, but we quickly overcome that challenge. A good example is Suriname, being Dutch.
That's right.
Belize, Dominican Republic, with a lot of Spanish-speaking people. So the Lord has helped us, and we're able to do translations. We have resources for them, and we have wonderful, hard-working directors in each of the nations that really help us to get the gospel across to the different people groups, as it were. One of the challenging nations that we have right now, as you probably know, is Haiti.
Right.
Right now, Haiti isn't with us. So when we think about challenges, that is probably one of the most challenged right now.
Yeah, it's Haiti.
That is life or death right now in Haiti. In fact, right now, that director couldn't be with us because he couldn't get out.
Wow, they wouldn't let him out of the country.
No, he couldn't get the documents to leave, So that's what we face, but we look at it with a smile.
Of course.
We look at all the opportunities instead of the challenges, and we look at them as stepping stones to share the gospel.
What makes you excited when you sit and you dream about the Caribbean, and you dream about what could happen in the future? What comes to your mind? What makes you excited?
What makes me excited is what I may call that paradigm shift for the pastors, especially the shift in thinking, because I think a lot of the pastors and the churches, they went through a hard time coming out of COVID,
right?
As one, and they need help, and that's why we exist, and
right.
We want pastors to know that we're here to serve them and to help them, because they're just humans as well. Many of them, they get depressed sometimes and frustrated, but we want pastors to know that we're here to help them, we're here to support them, we're here to serve them, and we let pastors know that we don't know everything, but whatever we know, we would love to help them and to show them and to hold their hands and train them and provide all these free resources to them.
Yeah.
So that excites me. That has me waking up very early, on mornings, trying to figure out a new strategy, or a new church, a new area, a new plan. How could we serve them better? I am really just like a musician, passionate and on to obsess.
That's right. I think it's amazing. I think I'm always trying to think about our audience and how they might be interpreting what we're talking about, and how to bring them into this conversation. One of the things that's unique about Every Home for Christ is our commitment is to serve and to undergird the church, what you're just talking about. And I think in missions, there's Western missions, there's indigenous missions, and these are important distinctions. But something that is really we're passionate about as a people, the Every Home for Christ tribe, is we're passionate about serving everyday believers to be witnesses in their community of the gospel, to reach their neighbors. In fact, I'm wearing a shirt that on the front of it says, "Love your neighbor." It says it in 3 different languages, and that is like the mantra of the ministry of Every Home for Christ. How do you see that? How do you see that in other nations beyond Trinidad and Tobago? this kind of movement of loving your neighbor? How do you see that playing out in real time?
We have developed a little saying in terms of that same shift in thinking. And that saying is there's a distinction between going witnessing and witnessing as you go.
Right.
When we think about going witnessing,
Huh.
that is the traditional where you get ready to go witnessing.
Right.
So you put on your evangelism hat, you have your tracks.
That's right.
And you
Maybe
go,
throw on your backpack,
Yeah,
your evangelism backpack.
and you go witnessing. But then there's the other concept of just naturally
Yeah.
witnessing as you go.
Yeah.
So you don't have to get ready. It means that as you go to work, you're on the field.
Right.
When you just go to the gas station or the supermarket or wherever you go, you're on the field. And what we've realized, Tanner, is that many times if we don't pray as believers for God to open our eyes, we wouldn't see the opportunities that are right in front of us.
Right.
Sometimes we may see that same opportunity and be blinded by it and see it like as a problem to avoid. And one of the greatest lessons that I have learned that amplifies that point is the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
Because with the Good Samaritan, it was the pastor and the assistant pastor that saw the bleeding guy first. And what they saw was the same thing that the Good Samaritan saw.
Right.
But how they saw it was different. And I'm talking about me as a pastor. You see?
Yeah, of course.
We who pass first, we religious people pass first. And what they saw a problem to avoid. They went the other side. But the Good Samaritan, well, that's an oxymoron in itself, as I say, good and Samaritan, because the Jews hated them.
That's right.
Yeah, and he saw the guy, and he saw an opportunity to minister. But not only that, he was moved to compassion. But compassion isn't enough, because anybody could feel sorry and say, well, the Lord bless you. But he was moved to action, because he went down, he took care of the guy, he even paid for him, And this is the story that we're telling now with the Love Your Neighbor initiative, how to love your neighbor. But before that could come, Tana, I really believe God has to touch our eyes and our hearts and our hands so that we could see the opportunities. Our hearts could be moved to compassion, but our hands need to move to action as well too.
Yeah.
Because I really believe when you go out and you see somebody in need, and if you have the resources, it isn't good enough to say, I'll pray for you, or the Lord bless you. If you have the resources to help, we encourage Christians to help them, because that's what Jesus asked us to do. And when you start helping people and you start caring for people, then people start seeing you differently.
That's right.
Because when the gospel becomes livable, it becomes believable. We need to live the gospel.
Beautiful.
People need to see that our lives will speak volumes,
That's right.
And people will know. As the saying goes, people really don't know how much you know until they know how much you care. So they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Because out in the streets when we go, people don't really care that you have a master's in theology or you went to Bible school or you're a bishop.
It's true.
People don't really care to know that, especially when they're hurting, they're depressed, they're frustrated, they need. And so what we do is we help them first.
Right.
We be very quiet and listen.
That's right.
We listen to them.
Don't you think that's an important part of evangelism?
Very
It's
important.
actually listening.
Yeah, very important.
It's not just talking, it's listening.
It's listening, and it's not about you and you pushing your agenda on people.
That's right.
Which might be a church or whatever it is. It's about listening to them, and people not foolish. They will know if you genuinely care. And so we encourage that whole system of following up and following through. Because when you leave a home, Tana, the truth about it is is a process. It doesn't happen immediately. And that's where we encourage, the strategy of writing down their names and their numbers so that when you go back to your church, you could follow up and follow through on them and say, hey, Tana, how you doing? How was the operation last week?
That's right.
How's your wife doing? We prayed for your kids. Are they better? And to me, those little things go a long way.
That's
Sometimes we encourage churches to go and drop a little grocery bag for the needy, and we offer to serve communion like the old people shut-ins. We encourage
That's
people
beautiful.
to take transportation and go and bring the people if they want to go to church and they're living in rural areas. So all these little things, it says something.
That's right.
And so with the Love Your Neighbor initiative, we really encouraging the churches to get out of the four walls, go into your community, and minister. But even more than that, as I said, try and live the gospel wherever you are.
That's right.
Your co-worker, and even with your families too. As I keep saying that there are really only two people that know you, which is your family and your work and the people you work with, because that's the people that interact with you.
That's right.
Every day. So when you're on your best behavior in church, that is just a couple hours in church.
That's right.
When you go home and you go into the community, you go to the supermarket, make the gospel livable. Let your light shine, as it were, and let people see Jesus in you. And it's the simple things like how you talk to people, how you react to them.
That's right.
How you help them. Little things. Yeah, little easy day-to-day things. And we've seen people come to know Jesus by these things. I have personal examples because through the Love Your Neighbor initiative, it provoked me to try and get to know the names of my neighbors next door. And I started to go to them and help them and find out the different needs, invite them over for a meal. And right now we have one neighbor that gave her life to Jesus.
That's amazing.
Yeah, by just coming and spending time. And then we have another neighbor where my mom lives. She is a Muslim and she came to know Jesus, but it took my mom 4 years. That's why I said it's sometimes not quick, but it takes time. It's a process. But Christians need to understand that and keep investing.
Amen.
And keep that relationship going.
Amen. I think what you're doing, Derryck, when you talk, is you're broadening the aperture of what it means to evangelize. And I think you're right. There was a paradigm at one time where it was, how did you say it? Go and witness. Yeah, and it was to go out on an outreach. Right. And now I think the way that the ministry of Every Home for Christ is approaching evangelism is saying, hey, no, it's witness as you go, and it's your character matters. How do you live before people? How do you talk? I think it's really profound, your point about listening, about evangelism is listening. I think a lot of people, when they think of evangelism, they literally think of going and telling somebody what to believe. And I think what you're saying is, hey, part of being a witness to Christ is actually going and sitting down and having the cup of coffee or having the meal or approaching your neighbor and listening, just asking them where they're at. And so some of your language, I think, is so rich and is super helpful, maybe for somebody even in the US or elsewhere around the world, when they think about how they can actually be a witness, you're giving language to some of that. Derryck, one of the questions I ask on every one of these podcasts, it's my go-to question at the end of every podcast, is I ask the same thing over and over again. And there's language that we begin to use in the ministry of Every Home for Christ. We talk about carrying Christ, and it seems relevant to even what we were just talking about. It's this belief that we carry Christ with us. And my question that I ask every podcast is, when I say the words carry Christ, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Same term that I used just now. When the gospel becomes livable, it becomes believable. Because it's just part of you. So you don't put it down when you finish church on a shelf. It's what you live every day. Because the truth about it is, Tana, sometimes the Lord will bring people across your path, but your evangelism hat is off because you were off duty then. You see? So when the gospel becomes livable, it becomes believable. It means that carrying Jesus anywhere you go, all the time, everywhere.
Right.
See? So to me, that is what carrying Christ is. You don't ever put him down. You
That's right. You
always,
never put him down. I love that answer.
you always have him. So man, it's just great. I love that philosophy that we on, this idea that we on, because really we used to only think about going witnessing and go
Right.
to home, but now with witnessing as you go, carrying Jesus all the time, it means you're always on duty.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Derryck, thank you. You're actually so wise. Your wisdom, Derryck, is so profound, and thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for bringing that vulnerability, or just talking about the way that God preserved you. It's clear to me that there was purpose in that, and your love for people. It's also clear to me as we talk that you just love people. I know that as a leader, I haven't said this yet, but you oversee our entire Caribbean area for us. And as a leader, I think I want to say it on the podcast. I just think you're such a significant leader in our fellowship, in the way that you love the world, but the way that you love your leadership team as well, and the way you serve. I've seen it firsthand, and I'm just excited to get to say. I've been excited to have this conversation, but I'm grateful that we've for all of the wisdom that you bring. So thank you.
I thank you and thank every Home for Christ, because I wasn't always like that. But I would have seen leaders like David Shaw, Scott Middlebrook lead. I would have sat down and looked at Dick Eastman. Look at you too, Tanner. I remember seeing you for the first time with BFAM.
Yeah.
Probably would have been around 2014, 2015.
Yeah, I was a young buck. I'm still a young buck, but
crafting BFAM, and I was really blown away with the culture of every Home for Christ.
Yeah.
And how big everybody is on prayer and loving people, and these things have had a real positive impact.
Yeah.
On me, rubbing shoulders and being with people like David Shaw and Scott Middlebrook, and that team, Jacob George, the initial team,
That's right.
They really helped me.
That's right.
To be who I am today. And I want to publicly say what a wonderful bunch of leaders I have. It makes my job real easy.
Yeah.
Because I have a bunch of real hard-working leaders in the Caribbean.
That's awesome.
Proud to serve every Home for Christ, and proud to serve them as well.
Amen. Well, thanks. Thank you for the podcast.
You're welcome.
Derryck, you're the man. Bless you.
Okay.
Dude, I have been loving the podcast, whether I'm hearing it live or catching up on old episodes, and just I'm so struck by how every story is so unique, so authored by God, so just not one-dimensional. And I just listened to your beach podcast with Derryck Dhanoosingh, who I just love, our director in Trinidad and Tobago. I know it was a while ago, but just a profound story. Talk to me just about how the podcast is impacting you as you listen to stories, and maybe even just what stuck out to you when you were sitting there with Derryck and witnessing his tears and his passion and just his beautiful narrative.
There's a lot of different kinds of podcasts that we've done now. We've done Americans and kind of thought leaders within missions, but I think my favorite podcasts are the ones that we get to do with people internationally. Yeah. And specifically, these are EHC, Every Home for Christ, leaders around the world, and just sitting with them and hearing their stories. These are people that I've known for a long time, but actually getting to sit down.
You didn't know a lot of the details.
No way. Just sitting down, looking them in the eye, seeing their tears, hearing their stories. I hope that our guests are as blessed by it, or those listening are as blessed by it as much as I am. I mean, this particular podcast, you called it the Beach Podcast. It's a perfect name for it. We were sitting on a beach in the Dominican Republic, which if you haven't watched this via video on our YouTube, you wouldn't know that, but we're sitting in this beautiful vista, listening to a guy tell his story. And Derryck oversees the entire Caribbean region for us. So he's seen 30 nations or something, island nations. And just hearing his story, it was a little bit surreal, just sitting there, and just such a blessing to me. I hope it blesses our audience as much as it blesses me.
Yeah. From accountant and kind of reticent about evangelism and kind of hanging out in the corner of the church playing his bass, he said, which was awesome.
That's right, playing the bass.
This guy's a musician, to just being passionate and saying, like, this is my calling, this is my joy, and just the Lord's hand on his life, you know, just really beautiful.
So beautiful. Good.
Thank you for joining us today on the Redeeming Missions podcast. If you like what you heard, we encourage you to visit everyhome.org/redeemingmissions to find all past episodes and learn more about supporting the efforts of Every Home to carry Christ to everyone, everywhere, in every generation. Echoing the prayer of St. Patrick, Christ with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us. Let us carry Christ to our world. Until next time.